Why Dennis Allen and the Saints lack the necessary pieces for long-term success. Ladies and gentlemen, today we have Off the Bench with T-Bob, Jacob Hester. So the idea here is that the Saints don't have the pieces. They don't have what it takes to have a long-term success in the NFL. Now, in a way, now without hearing obviously any of this video, in a way, I mean, that's true. Like in a way, the Saints do have a old roster. They do have an older core. The core is good. The core has been good, but long-term, you have to eliminate players like Demario Davis. You have to eliminate players like Alvin Kamara. You have to eliminate players like Derek Carr. So, yeah, naturally, a team like that is going to be weaker if you look down the road. But the Saints aren't really built for down the road. The Saints are built for right now. I think it's pretty obvious that the Saints are built for a 2-ish year window. And it's also crazy how fast that can change. It's amazing how fast all of a sudden you can go from a weak core to, wow, this team is set up for success for the long term. You know, and vice versa. It's amazing how fast like teams that seem to be set up for the long term all of a sudden aren't set up for the long term. Like halfway through Mac Jones' rookie year in New England, people thought New England was set up for another 10 years of success, right? Like right now, people think Green Bay is set up for long-term success because they like what they saw to Jordan Love. But as we saw with Mac Jones, that can change rather quickly. So the idea of like long-term success versus short-term success and all that, if I was in the front office, what I would be focused on is success right now. I can't forecast long-term success. I can't forecast injuries. I can't forecast development. I can't forecast any of that stuff. What I would try and do consistently in the front office is win now. And that's what the Saints kind of do. Not to stutter there, but the Saints do try and prioritize being relevant and being successful for the upcoming season. And that has worked well for them.
Here. And look, one article that we had in the document today was all about Alontae Taylor. Is he underappreciated? You know, we spent so much time talking about Lattimore, about Paulson Adebo, now Kool-Aid McKinstry. Alontae Taylor's been really good. My thing is, I don't really care about any of the individuals in the secondary right now. As we've said, I think that when you look at those four corners, the Saints are primed to have a top 10, maybe a top 5, probably a top 5, if everybody stays healthy, top 5 cornerback room in the entire league.
Yeah, I agree.
It creates great competition.
Yeah.
And forces everybody to be at their best in terms of who's going to win the jobs on the outside. You have a lot of versatility there in terms of who will be the nickel. Will it be Taylor? Will it be McKinstry? And then who tries to find playing time where they can. Like, I think that is going to be the core group of this team going forward into this season. It's probably the best position group on the team. But then that got me thinking about something else. And so did a New Orleans Football article, Jake. And that is, who are, I don't know which one's correct.
Who bees
the core of this Saints team, right? Like during 17 to 20, you had the very famous 2006 draft, which gave you like Streif, Colston, Reggie Bush, Pierre Thomas, everybody else that would go on to be this core Drew Brees that you thought of, that's your game, right? That you thought of forever as being like, wow, I freaking love these guys. You had the 17 draft, or you got Kamara, Ramchick, Cam Jordan had fully come into his own by that time. Like Marcus Colston, Mike Thomas, Colston for the old group, Thomas for the new one. You look now, you're 7 years removed from that 17 draft, and who do you have those same emotions about?
The core is the same. And man, I'm telling you, cores change real quick. Like, and you kind of don't know until you know when it comes to this kind of stuff. Like if you look at the Pelicans, what would you have said 2 years ago? Who is the core? You would have been like, well, the core is probably Brandon Ingram, Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, Jose Alvarado. You would have named the young, exciting players. Now it's like, who's the core? It's like, well, it's sure as hell none of those guys. Like, it sure as hell isn't Brandon Ingram. He's about to get traded. At any minute, he could be traded. It sure as hell isn't Larry Nance and Najee Marshall. It sure as hell isn't Jonas. Like, I don't know who the core is. Right? It changes. Just like with football teams, just like with baseball teams. A guy who can be a core member of the team can be a core member of what's happening, and then a year later be like, he's not really the core piece anymore. And it can go the other way, where a player can be like Carl Granderson. Going into last season, every single person would have named Carl Granderson as a core part of the defense. Would they right now? I don't know. Changes, right? It fluctuates. What if Chase Young comes in, has 12 sacks, and Brian Brzee is an absolute animal in the middle? Right now, no one is saying Chase Young and Brian Brzee are part of the core of the defense. But if that happens, guess what? All of a sudden, it's like, well, we got a 24-year-old superstar on the edge and going into his third year at that point, defensive tackle. They're the core. They're the core of the defensive line. So, I'd be really careful with this. When you're talking ifs and buts and nothing much, just a paper cut, like when you're talking about all that, it can be here today and gone tomorrow.
You don't feel great about Kamara anymore. And you feel okay about Chris Olave, but somehow he's had back-to-back 1,000 yards receiving seasons and remains kind of unexciting. You know Derek Carr is not a core piece because he's just here until he isn't.
Yeah.
You keep drafting offensive and defensive linemen that suck. I mean, is Brian Brzee? He does not suck. He would be maybe the closest. Yeah. Him and Olave. And why don't you feel the same way you used to feel about those other guys? It's
because we're not winning 12, 13 games a year. Same exact reason we don't feel as a Pelicans fan. Last year, I hated the team. Last year, it was miserable to root for that team, to watch those games, to go to those games. They were unexciting, they were uninspiring, they were miserable. It's largely the same group of players. So what changed? I know, they suck. Like, that's what changed. Why don't we feel the same way about Chris Olave that we felt about Michael Thomas all those years ago? Michael Thomas was the offensive player of the year and setting NFL records. Oh, and also we were making runs to the NFC title game. Chris Olave has been part of teams that went 9-8 and 7-10. Like, that's why. Why don't we feel the same way about Andy Dalton as we did about Drew Brees? Because it's Andy Dalton. Like, winning, all that. If the Saints make a run, I'll tell you this. If the Saints win 11 games this year and we win the division and we make a run, all of a sudden Chris Olave is not going to be very unexciting. All of a sudden people aren't going to be giving up on Alvin Kamara. I can promise you that. So, I like to look at it in eras and chapters. It's much easier to answer, right? Who are the major players in this chapter of the New Orleans Saints? Derek Carr, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Marshon Lattimore. Very easy to answer that. If I said, who's the long-term pieces, all of a sudden it's like, well, I can't say Derek Carr. I can't say Demario Davis. I can't say Tyrann Mathieu. I can't say Cam Jordan. I can't say any of these established players. So what do I do? But you also don't know even who your options are. What if in 3 years Spencer Rattler is all pro? Like, what if he just hits the ground running? What if he's one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? Right now, you'd be insane to say Spencer Rattler is a core piece of the team. But once you see it, then all of a sudden it's obvious that he's a core piece of the team. So I look at it much more in chapters and eras of the Saints, or just teams, versus like who is your core, and what does that even mean? Like, is the core, how long is someone part of the core? When the Bengals went to the Super Bowl, how many people would have said that T. Higgins is part of their core? Probably everybody. Was he part of their core 2 months ago when he was being shopped all over the place? No. To no fault of his own, right?
Is it simply because they're not winning as much? But I mean,
yes.
Even that old core, that 06 core, they had 7 and 9 seasons, but still remain beloved. It's just, I don't know.
You know what you had to fall back on?
Drew Brees. Yeah.
Brees and Peyton.
Yes.
And that's why you felt different about it.
Yeah.
Because even in a 7 and 9 season, you're like, it's fine. Drew will get back on track. And sometimes it was the defense during that run, obviously.
Yeah, it was always exciting offensive football, if nothing else.
And so I think that's like, it's hard to have a core when you don't have the core piece at the core position. It's just, that's the way that it is. Look around the NFL and teams that you feel good about. Name me one that you're like, I love their core, that's got a quarterback that's not going to be the future.
Miami Dolphins. Like, if you're the Miami Dolphins, who's the core? Who is the core if you're a Dolphins fan? I mean, if you're like, okay, who's the core of the Miami Dolphins? Is it Tyreek Hill? He's obviously the best player, but is he part of your like long-term core? Is it Jalen Waddle? Is it Raheem Mostert? Is it Tua? I don't know, but I know who it is in this chapter. It's much easier to say who is the important players in this chapter of the Miami Dolphins. Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert. Like it, very, very, very simple to answer. So I don't really know. Like the Green Bay is such a good example where am I sure that Jordan Love is going to be the all-pro franchise quarterback that people are saying he's going to be? Am I certain that's going to be the case in 2 years? No. Look at Jalen Hurts. Jalen Hurts went from he is the second best quarterback in the NFL. He is a MVP. I mean, the Eagles are in a good spot with Jalen Hurts. Now what are we hearing? Maybe Jalen Hurts is overrated. Can you win with Jalen Hurts? You know, heard a lot of people all of a sudden wavering on Jalen Hurts. How many people were wavering on Jalen Hurts the day before the Super Bowl? Right now, what have we heard? Who's got the best core? Who do y'all think people would say? The Texans? Yeah, they probably would. They would say the Texans. What if Stroud's terrible next year? What if they regress? Then what? All of a sudden, Anthony Richardson. He's the best. He's the best young quarterback. I mean, we see it every single season. Every single season, multiple times a season, we see it. Blank team's in good hands with blank player. A year later, blank player's cut. A year later, blank player's traded. A year later, he's terrible.
It's a hard conversation. Like, look at the Steelers, right? It's like, oh, Russell Wilson, is he really? But like the Steelers have nice pieces.
Yeah.
But we don't have that conversation because, well, you don't feel great about where they're at quarterback. It's like they're searching. You get Justin Fields, which, okay, maybe. It's like it's not Russ. I don't know. Like they feel like they're in purgatory probably a little bit. Like we go across the league. The Giants, same situation. Like Malik Neighbors, and you've got some pieces that you feel good about, but it's like we're not going to talk about because Daniel Jones is the quarterback.
But pick a good team. Pick a good team. Pick the Kansas City Chiefs. Who is their long-term core? Like, who do you feel really good about long-term if you're a Chiefs fan? Patrick Mahomes. And that's all you need. Like, are you going to say, you can't say Travis Kelce. We thought he was going to retire this offseason. Are you going to say, what are you going to say, Isaiah Pacheco? You think if Patrick Mahomes wasn't there, you'd be fine with Isaiah Pacheco? You know, like, even the really good teams, it's like very rarely do you have just this obvious long-term core. You kind of just have to play with the cards you're dealt with. You play with the cards you're dealt with for that season, see what happens, and you keep moving. Sometimes, just like with the Pelicans, what worked 2 years ago ain't working now. Players get older, players get hurt, players regress a little bit, and then you got to move stuff around. Dyson Daniels, going into last season, people would say, yeah, he's part of the future here in New Orleans. Right now, better start updating their resume, my boy. State Farm might be in your future. You better get used to door-to-door sales. You can look at every first overall pick. I promise you, for months, a lot of people in Oakland thought Jamarcus Russell was part of their young core. And that quickly changed. So, it's a bit of a fruitless conversation. If you look at it like that, like a long-term core, it's more of who are the important players right now.
Yes, you're right. And when the quarterback doesn't work, then nothing works, right? Then a guy like Saquon Barkley, who if you did have a good quarterback, would have ended up being a core guy in New York that people felt great about. Instead, he's now in Philly. So it's like everything else in football, Jake. It just goes back to quarterback.
Yep.
That's as good of a hypothesis. I thought it maybe all went back to winning and just not winning enough. And that
they're one and the same because you have to have a good quarterback usually to win.
It's definitely an element as well. But to your point, the Steelers do win. And yeah, you got like Cam Hayward. And I'm sure that Steelers fans would have their guys say, no, this is we
George
love.
Pickens.
But it's not like
TJ Watt. But
maybe they do have a bit more core. The Saints, I don't even know if they have that many amount of guys. Maybe Brzee gets to be that. Maybe Olave gets to be that.
I mean, Olave is way better than George Pickens. TJ Watt is an absolute superstar, but but that's also a narrative too. Like, you look at the Steelers and it's like people kind of like the fact that the Steelers are always over 500. They never have a below 500 season with Tomlin, like all that stuff. But if you look at the Steelers and the Saints, it's like the same stuff that the Saints are getting crushed for is what the Steelers are getting celebrated for. The Saints last year, people are acting like 9-8 was the worst thing that ever happened to New Orleans. I would much rather have Derek Carr than any combination of Justin Fields, Kenny Pickett, Russell Wilson, or whatever. Yeah, TJ Watt is sweet. I would rather have Chris Olave than George Pickens. I would rather have Alvin Kamara than Najee Harris. So,
Taysom Hill would be a guy that I would say I feel pretty great about.
But he's 33. Like, that's what I'm talking about. How is he your long-term core? He's 33 years old.
I think,
but the emotions are just different nowadays.
Yeah, and I think where your emotions, where you're having some trouble connecting is Cesar Ruiz, first-round pick. Okay, you don't have it there.
Exactly.
He's
Ryan
a lineman.
Ramczyk, you had it for a long time, but now might not play football again. You don't have it. Peyton Turner, first-round pick. Absolutely nothing there. You go across, like, Marshon Lattimore was a first-round pick, so maybe you throw him into, but there's like all the.
But people absolutely had an emotional attachment and would say Marshon's part of the core whenever the Saints were sweet. Whenever the year where they really had their resurgence, and people were celebrating the Alvin Kamaras and the Mark Ingrams and the Michael Thomases and the Marshon Lattimore. Lattimore was absolutely part of that. And how many people during that time frame would have said Mark Ingram is part of the core? It's fun when you're winning. It's fun whenever the team is excited. It's fun when the team is having fun. It's fun whenever you're scoring 45 points a game on Monday Night Football and Sunday Night Football. It's fun when the dome is rocking. It's a blast. It's awesome. The players are awesome. It was fun with the Pelicans 2 years ago. Leaving the arena, everyone chanting the Jose chant. That was fun. Now, Jose's a liability. Jose probably shouldn't be on the roster. Jose is not the impactful player that he was. Is Jose part of the long-term core for the Pelicans? No. But why was it fun in that moment? Because the team was young, scrappy, fun, energetic, and they were winning. Like, that's the combination for the core. That's the combination for an emotional attachment. It's hard to be emotionally attached to players when a team is uninspired and going 500. That's across the board.
He was kind of already, and he was already kind of like, to your point, when you had Breeze, he was a part of that core, like with Kamara, with a young Kamara and everybody else. That was that 2017 draft where you just absolutely hit it out the park.
And then Trevor Penning, another first-round pick, creates no emotion for you. So think of the first-round pick like Cesar Ruiz, Trevor Penning, Peyton Turner. Does that do any? That's 3 first-round picks. Does that do anything for you?
No.
But if you did the same thing with like the Patriots back in the day, and they whiffed on pick after pick after pick after pick, they'd be like, yeah, I have no emotion to these guys. But you do have emotion to the Julian Edelmans and the Wes Welkers and the Tom Bradys and the Gronkowskis and players like that. Those are because they're impact players. Because they're impact players who you're relying on. You don't care about the first-round left guard who didn't work out, or the first-round defensive tackle, or the first-round outside linebacker who didn't work out. Or the free agents you sign that don't work out, the Albert Hainsworth or the Ocho Cinco or players like that. So it's different. It's very different. The emotional connection is not always synonymous with like a long-term core, or it's not always synonymous with a first-round pick, or it's not always synonymous with a certain position. There's a lot of factors that go into this.
No, nothing at all. And
not
so
even a slight
you've had
stirring.
some misses. And Brian Brzee has been, so far, I think he's been a good player. I think he can only get better. He plays a position that's not going to get a lot of fanfare.
In a rotational defensive tackle.
Still, he's not a full-time starter.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So I think it's with your first round picks, that's why you don't have a lot of fanfare. That's why you don't have maybe the core that you feel really good about.
But that's kind of the Saints' strategy. The strategy the Saints have had is, okay, let's draft these guys who are rotational players who can just add some depth because we have our core. That's what the Saints have believed. They believe that Chris Olave, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, Cam Jordan, Marshon Lattimore, Tyrann Mathieu, we know the list. They believe that's the core. That's who's going to allow us to win. So let's use these draft picks to go get guys who can fill positions of need or give us some depth. They're not drafting Brian Brzee to be Aaron Donald. They're drafting him to give them something. Like be a C+. Be a rotational player. When you're called upon, be good. But they're not asking him to win Defensive Player of the Year. They're not even asking him to start like right now. They're just asking him, hey man, give us a couple reps. Give us some plays. You can see it with a lot of players. Teams who don't have a core, they're drafting players to try and be the core. Like the Atlanta Falcons. They drafted Kyle Pitts, Drake London, Bijan Robinson. They drafted these guys like, hey, be the core of this team. We don't have a core. Be this. So it's just a different strategy. It's a different timeline. It's a different kind of idea from the front office.
And again, like Fuaga being like, I think he's going to be a really good player. We'll have to see. Is that somebody that's going to potentially change the narrative?
Yeah, look, I mean, it took 11 years from 06 to 17 to hit on another one of those home run drafts that ended up becoming an era-defining draft. I wonder when the next one will be, as we are now 7 years removed. How do you feel about the Saints? Who would you say? Are we off base here, right? You say, no, I love I love Demario Davis, but yeah, I think you nailed it, Jake. Without a quarterback, it just feels like the long-term hope, just that there kind of isn't any there. And so guys like Davis start to feel like these really special, almost rentals of sorts, as opposed to guys you can really get your roots into. Also,
I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like that's true at all. Like, I don't think Demario Davis feels like a rental at all. I mean, Demario Davis to me feels like a lifelong Saint. He feels as much of a player in Saints lore like Archie Manning. I mean, Demario Davis to me is like he's Mr. New Orleans. So I think they're having like three different conversations at the same time. Because you do an emotional attachment is different than your young core, which is different than just your impact players, which is different from your long-term core. I mean, again, like the year before Cincinnati gets Joe Burrow, you would absolutely be like, yeah, I mean, the future just seems hopeless. The future just seems this. The future seems that. 40 minutes after his first start, you're like, okay, the future is very bright. The future is awesome. Like, it changes on a dime. We have no clue. We have no clue what the true future looks like. Absolutely no idea. And no team does. Even teams that, like Chicago right now. Yeah, Chicago has hope. We have hope. But what if Caleb Williams is a total disaster? Or Bryce Young, like Carolina, when they drafted Bryce Young, say, okay, we have hope. This is our guy. Right now, how much hope is there in Carolina? It is, I'm telling you, it swings. Again, the Eagles were, the day before the Super Bowl, Nick Sirianni was the greatest coach of all time. Jalen Hurts is the greatest quarterback of all time. What did we hear last year? We heard, man, maybe they'll fire Nick Sirianni. That was a real conversation in Philly. A real conversation. Yeah, maybe is Jalen Hurts really the fit? Telling y'all. It's a bunch of different conversations. There's a lot to this. A very complex situation.
So Davis a key member of the kind of the run that you had there at the end of the journey.
Now, I do love the defensive back room. That's what we started this conversation with. Paulson Adebo is a third rounder. Alante Taylor was a second rounder. Jordan Howden was a fifth rounder.
And let me say this about Demario Davis too. It's funny how quick, like T-Bob's kind of making my point for me, how quick people have forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, we are like 4 years removed from being a NFC title threatening, Super Bowl threatening, best defense in the NFL, best offense in the NFL situation. Demario Davis is part of that. Marshon Lattimore is part of that. So, just because Drew Brees isn't there, just because there's been 2 years of down 2 years, man, I mean, you talk about some quick memory, some quick to be like, Demario Davis feels like a bit of a rental. My man, we were 13-3 not too long ago. We were 12 wins not too long ago. Like, it's kind of crazy that it really hasn't been that long since Demario Davis and Marshon Lattimore were part of the best defenses in the NFL. Like, I know you can say, well, Drew Brees isn't here, well, Sean Payton's not here. No doubt about it. But to just discredit what Cam Jordan, Marshon Lattimore, Alvin Kamara, Demario Davis, just discredit what those guys were a part of a handful of years ago. And to say, like, I have no emotions to Marshon Lattimore. I have no emotions to Demario Davis. I have no emotions to Cam Jordan. I had a hell of a lot of emotions with Cam Jordan during the NFC title game against the Rams when I thought he had a strip sack fumble return for a touchdown and ended up getting called back. I came outside of my body. I was in an ethereal plane. My spirit came outside. I was up into the rafters. I was floating around. I had an out-of-body experience. Like, I had a ton of emotion there. Just because it was 4 or 5 years ago, do I just say, I don't really have any emotion to some of these players? I mean, I say it all the time, but man, do Saints fans act like we have been really bad for a really long time when we have not been bad, 1, and 2, it has not been a long time. I mean, that stuff blows my mind. It really does. But, it's a different, people view it differently. Like, they view the whole thing differently. But it is shocking at how long ago I think people make it seem that the Saints were really, really good.
And he played so well that you got rid of Marcus May. Now, Marcus May was not a good football player in New Orleans, but you moved on from him after giving him a big contract. And so you've hit in that room. You hope you hit on Kool-Aid McKinstry as a second-round pick. So if you have what we're talking about here, it's probably going to come from that room. And you also have Tyrann Mathieu still there playing at a high level. You still got Marshon, as we talked about, playing at a high level. It's going to have to come from probably that room if you want to create a core. It's going to be in New Orleans for 5 years and play at a very high level because –
But hey, I mean, also, like, guys, don't you think it's not a coincidence that the late round picks who we have hit on have been defensive? Dennis Allen's a defensive guru. It should be no surprise to anybody that we're finding the diamonds in the rough and developing the diamonds in the rough defensively without Sean Payton. It should be no surprise that some of the offensive players that we've tried to develop haven't been developed because we don't have Sean Payton. So hopefully with Clint Kubiak, that'll change. Now, we haven't hit on every defensive player, but it's no surprise that the ones that we have hit, like Jacob's talking about, have been defensive.
You've missed on the defensive line.
Yeah.
You've certainly missed on the offensive line in the draft, and it's not coming from there, and it ain't coming from quarterback right now.
Well, all will be solved when Derek Carr becomes a top 12 quarterback this fall.
There you go.
Thanks to Clint Kubiak.
Again, I hope and pray that you're right because if the Saints are better, it helps everything around here.
I know.
Yes.
Wow.
Agreed. There you go. I mean, interesting conversation. We talked about a lot of different. What the hell just happened? Talked about a lot of different stuff. It is a fun conversation to have right there, where it's like, what is a core? What is long term? What is an emotional connection? How do you value players? So. But I mean, you talk about a wasted breath, or waste of copy, or a waste of whatever. Like, think about all the people who were like, the Patriots have found their franchise quarterback in Mac Jones. Google it. There's a million articles. I'll do it right now. From 2022, Patriots quarterback Mac Jones, very good or elite. Most experts agree the New England Patriots is poised for improvement in year 2, but just how much? Mac Jones having quite the offseason. Solid training camp. For the most part, Jones exceeded expectations in a rookie season in which he started all 18 games, blah, blah, blah. Former Patriot Rob Ninkovich said recently Jones was good enough to lead New England to 12 wins in 2022. Former quarterback Scott Zolak says some in Foxborough compare Jones' work ethic and preparation to the one and only Tom Brady. On a list of his best quarterbacks under 25, Dan Orlovsky ranks Jones ahead of Kyler Murray. Pro Football Talk, Chris Sims places Jones at number 18 in his overall rankings. In 2021, is Mac Jones the next Tom Brady? I mean, how much longer after August 5th, 2022, how much longer before Mac Jones was benched? Be careful, ladies and gentlemen. Get on down in the comments below. I will see you in the next video.